process, you may be asked to undergo some pre-employment testing. Let's take a look at the different types of pre-employment tests, the most common tests that we see out there today. There's job knowledge, cognitive ability, work sample, assessment centers, personality testing, honesty and integrity testing, and physical abilities testing. The first type of testing, you may have heard of this before, is something called a job knowledge test, where you have questions that are designed to assess your technical or professional expertise in a specific knowledge area. You may have heard of something, for instance, like a CPA exam. This is a government agency or a licensing board that develops this type of job knowledge test. And for these tests, it evaluates what a person knows at the actual time that they're taking that test. The second type of testing is something called a cognitive ability test. We used to call these intelligence tests because they do assess the intelligence, the general mental ability, or the intellectual ability of the person taking the test at the time that they're taking it. Abilities include things like verbal and numerical ability, your ability to reason, your memory, to be able to recall things, problem solving, and processing information. Can you think of a type of job or position where a cognitive abilities test might be given as a measure of pre-employment? Well, here's a sample of one. This is a sample question from ExxonMobil's Cognitive Ability Pre-Employment Test for engineers. Here's the question. What would be the next number in the following series of numbers? The series that you're provided with is 1, 4, 2, 5, 3, 6. If you answered B, you'd be correct. So let's talk for a second about work sample and simulation tests. These tend to be used to assess specific skills and competencies, and you're required to produce behavior that is related to the job performance under very controlled conditions that somehow approximate or estimate those conditions that will be found on the job. Work sample tests include major tasks taken from the job under consideration. For instance, if I'm asking you to apply for a job where you're a computer programmer, I might have a work sample where I ask you to actually produce some body of work, some computer programs that you've actually designed. In a simulation, I might attempt to duplicate some features of the job under consideration, and you would perform a set of designated tasks and give it an objective score based on your performance. We often hear of simulations in terms of pilots simulating flying an actual plane. We don't want them to try this out on a real live aircraft. Here's some examples of some work samples and simulations for jobs. Things like a mechanic, asking them to repair a problem on a car, or reading a blueprint. For clerical type positions, perhaps a typing test, or demonstrating the ability to proofread something. For a cashier, something like operating a cash register or counting money back to someone and totaling a balance sheet at the end of the day. Again, as I mentioned, an airline pilot, you may have a pilot simulator. Or even for a taxi or an Uber driver, what about a driving test or a street knowledge test? These are all great examples of work samples and simulations. The next category of testing is a personality test. You may have already taken a personality test, perhaps as you were trying to decide on what type of career to go into. Personality tests look at the set of characteristics or properties that influence or help explain an individual's behavior. We look at personality traits because traits are stable and measurable characteristics that really help explain ways in which people vary between each other. Again, when we're using these, we want to make sure that we're assessing traits that are relevant to job performance and have shown to be effective predictors of subsequent job performance and success. So they have to be valid. One that your textbook talks about is the Big Five model of personality. The Big Five model is a personality test that looks at 5 key areas. It looks at conscientiousness, which is the general tendency to work hard and be very loyal. Emotional stability, which reflects a calm, relaxed approach to situations, events, and people. Openness to experience, which reflects a preference for situations where one can develop new ideas and things or solutions to problems through creativity. Agreeableness reflects a desire or willingness to work with others to achieve a common purpose or goal. It is an awareness of the feelings and interests of others. And last but not least, extroversion, which reflects a tendency to be outgoing in associating with other people, to seek and enjoy the company of others, and someone that interacts easily and well with other people. The next type of test, which is becoming increasingly popular as a method of screening out potentially dishonest employees, is the honesty and integrity test. This test measures your attitudes and experiences that are related to your individual honesty, trustworthiness, and dependability. The caution with these tests is that they can be viewed very negatively by the candidates who are taking them. But the proof, as they say, is in the pudding. You may have heard of Payless Shoes. Payless Shoes instituted an honesty and integrity test for all of their current employees, and they found that after 1 year, they had cut their theft losses by 20%. They translated that into a $21 million per year loss that they used to have due to employee theft, which was reduced by 20% after instituting these tests. A physical abilities test is probably the most straightforward test to think about and to remember, based on the fact that you need to be able to do something physically, muscle force, over a period of time, either alone or in conjunction with someone else. Physical abilities tests are used for very demanding and potentially dangerous jobs like firefighters or police officers to assess physical abilities such as strength and endurance. Again, tests should be used cautiously and carefully to make sure that we're validating on the basis of essential functions of the job only. We would not ask someone to do a physical abilities test unless we could prove the validity of this test and that it's required skill in the job itself. An assessment center test is a standardized procedure that involves the use of multiple measurement techniques. Typically, assessment center testing is done at the management and higher level within an organization. In Canada, assessment centers are used by the Public Service Commission of Canada to select candidates for senior managerial positions in the federal civil service. And often it's part of an executive development and education program. Companies like Ford Motor Company, General Motors, and Weyerhaeuser Canada use these on a regular basis to manage their top talent. It typically involves a 1 to 3 days of assessment, where several personnel are sent to a center for assessment at quite a considerable expense. Of things that you would have to do at an assessment center. Again, think of this as a manager and higher level type of assessment. There would be perhaps some instances of role play. Also something called an in-basket exercise, where you have to respond to phone messages, emails, memos, and reports and figure out which action needs to be taken first and how. Often lots of case analysis, so analyzing case scenarios. Some role playing again, where you're given a set of facts and have to present a presentation based on something. And lots of leaderless group discussions. So you're given a problem and you have to figure out how to solve that problem, typically something that you would encounter on the job. There are some advantages and some disadvantages of pre-employment tests. First of all, it's important to remember that they have to be objective and standard, and you're trying to measure a sample of behavior to test someone's knowledge, skills, and abilities that must relate to the job. If something you're testing does not relate specifically to the job, you're opening yourself up for potential for lots of legal challenges. But some of the advantages. If I'm doing a pre-employment test, I'm going to spend less time with candidates who are not suitable, who don't meet the criteria that I need. And the job candidates are treated consistently and fairly throughout this process because it's a standardized test. The disadvantages, as I just mentioned, the risk of legal action. If you're asking someone to take a test and they can't see the clear reason why this is a valid indicator of possible success, you're opening yourself up to legal action. The second disadvantage is cost. Most of these tests cost money. Think of the Big Five personality test. That's not a free test to administer. So someone in your organization needs to be trained on administering the test and compiling the results. And then the third is just practicality. If I'm a small organization with only one HR person or a very small group of HR people, who's going to administer these tests? It can take time and money to do that. And if I'm trying to hire someone quickly, it may become something that's not quite practical for my business to do. So what makes a good pre-employment test? We're going to explore two things in just a second, reliability and validity. But the good measuring stick is, the first thing is the test measures what it claims to measure. For example, if you're getting tested on your mental ability, that the test actually is measuring your mental ability and not some other characteristic like your personality. The second thing is that the test measures what it claims to measure consistently or reliably. We're going to look at this in just one second. And the third is that the test is job relevant. That's valid. The test measures one or more characteristics that are important to the job. So let's just look at reliability and validity for a second, which are these second 2 points. The first thing is, when we're talking about a test being good, we're saying that it is reliable. And what we mean by that is that the degree to which the test yields comparable data over time and that data is dependable and stable. What we're saying here is that if a person takes a test today and then takes a test again tomorrow or next week or next month, they would get a similar score. If they were to take it and get two completely different scores, we would say that this test is not reliable and therefore should not be used. Let me give you an example. In a physical abilities test, if I need to lift 50 pounds, and I'm tested on that today, and I'm able to lift 50 pounds without any difficulty, you would assume that tomorrow I would be able to have the same results. And the same thing with next week or even next month. But if I can't lift 50 pounds today, the opposite is also true. If I can't lift 50 pounds today, I'm not going to be able to lift 50 pounds tomorrow. So we're talking about how trustworthy the score on the test is. We're talking about reliability. If someone takes it today and they take it again in the near future, will the score be relatively the same? If it is, then the test is deemed to be reliable. The second concept is a good pre-employment test is valid. And what we're saying here is that the test measures the characteristics that it says it's going to, and there is a link between the test performance and job performance. If a test is valid, we can conclude that the person who scores well or high on the test is likely to perform well or at a high level in the job, and vice versa. Someone who scores low on the test would therefore not do well in this job. So validity describes the degree to which we can make specific conclusions or predictions about people based on their test scores. It helps us indicate the usefulness of this test. So we need good pre-employment tests to be both reliable and valid.